Hello everyone, my name is Jack and welcome to my world. And today, I have a very special guest joining me in that world. My good friend and fellow YouTuber, DC-MarvelGirl 1997, has lent her talented voice to my work. A while back, I made a video trailer for my fanfiction series X-Men Supreme. Now since I'm not a talented voice actor, I could only do so much to give it life. DC-MarvelGirl has far more talent in that domain, and she's offered to read an excerpt from my X-Men Supreme Reflections tie-in, specifically the one focusing on Jean Grey. For reference, these tie-ins were just short character-focused vignettes. They were meant to flesh out certain characters after the events of the story. This one focusing on Jean Grey occurred after the events of X-Men Supreme Volume 2. Now a lot happened in that period. That was also the point in the series where the love story between her and Cyclops really blossomed. This reflection ties closely into that, as well as some other unique aspects of her story in this series. And now, DC-MarvelGirl is going to bring it to life. Again, I can't thank her enough for doing this. Please, if you haven't already, subscribe to her channel. I'll provide a link to it in the description. I'll also provide a link to the chapter and the series. Now, without further ado, here's DC-MarvelGirl reading X-Men Supreme Reflections, Jean Grey. Enjoy!
Everyone loves to make jokes about love. Who can blame them? Love is sappy and uncool, a product of chick flicks and Hallmark greeting cards. For whatever reason, the ability to love is seen as a sign of weakness. You can't be tough, macho, and cool if you actually love someone, and if you can't be those things, then how can you be a decent hero? I don't worry it because the whole premise is stupid. Love is nothing to joke about. It's nothing to scoff at. It doesn't make anybody weak and does plenty to make us strong. Perhaps I'm biased because I've always been an emotional person. It's not enough for me to just feel these things. I have to be genuinely passionate about it. That passion is what drives me. It's part of who I am. It's part of what makes me strong. Love and passion are almost like another mutant power for me. The way I feel for others and for myself is a trait that has always guided me, now more so than ever. For everything I've been through, I feel I've completed my own special journey of passion and have so much to show for it. I still can't believe it. If someone went back in time 5 years ago and told me I would one day be lying naked in a bed with the love of my life, I probably would have checked myself back into the insane asylum. It was an outrageous notion that someone like me, Jean Grey, could have something like this. I come from a long line of degenerates who have plenty of passion, but for all the wrong things. It seems like only yesterday I was just a scared little girl who was too emotional for her own good. It's not like I was conditioned or anything. That's just how I was. Most kids at age 5 don't even know what the word empathy means. I was literally living it every day. It was hard not to sometimes because emotions always ran high in my family. In a ways, I was one of the luckier Greys. I wasn't born into an environment of deviance and self-destruction. My parents were among the first to make a conscious effort at being decent human beings. My dad came from a family of drunks and screw-ups. He tried to rise above it, going to school and becoming a teacher. My mother's side was even worse. It wasn't enough to just screw up at life. They had a tradition of crime going for them as well. My mom never hid that she had some black marks on her police record, but compared to the rest of her family, she was a saint. She and my dad had the right mindset when they got their act together and got married. They also had something else going for them. Luck. It's sort of that unspoken requirement for success that nobody likes to talk about. Having desire, dedication, and a strong work ethic is not enough to make it in this world. It also takes a certain level of blind luck. My parents had much more of it than the rest of their respective families. My dad had the uncanny fortune of walking into the wrong counselor's office when he was in high school. He went in with the intention of dropping out like so many of his relatives had, but the counselor happened to be someone who gave a damn. Not only did he talk him out of it, he helped him get his act together. Add on top of that, winning a scholarship that he admits he shouldn't have won, and you've got someone who drew all the right cards. My mom was just as lucky. She was well on her way to joining her mother in the art of being a career con artist. That plan fell through when she had the luck of a con literally blowing up in her face when she was a teenager. A guy she was trying to con was stupid enough to put out a cigar by throwing it across the room. He ended up setting his house on fire and getting himself killed in the process. My mother got out and was shaken by the whole ordeal. Then the guy's sister comes into the picture and finds out what my mom was up to. She could have turned her into the cops easy, but instead she took pity on her because her brother was such a degenerate to begin with. Add to that her own mother being busted before she could catch up with her, and you've got a perfect set of circumstances for her and my dad to meet. While luck may be nice and all, it does have a downside. Relying too much on luck makes the world around you much more fragile. It can also seriously affect someone's mindset. They can become arrogant, pretentious, and even weak to a degree. My parents got a lot of breaks, and to their credit, they tried to make the most of them. By the time my sister and I were born, they had a decent house and were making a respectable living. But even during those better days, I could sense just how fragile it was. It was almost like a precursor to my telepathic powers. My older sister Sarah didn't really pick up on it. My parents didn't pick up on it either. There was always this tension within the family, as if the slightest nudge in the wrong direction could destroy everything my parents had gained. It showed up in the smallest of ways, only I seemed to notice. Like every time the phone would ring, everyone would tense. It's almost as if they were expecting it to be a call from God himself, saying he was through giving the Gray family any breaks. It showed up in bigger ways as well, like when my parents would get into these random fights. They were never violent or anything, but they were pretty frequent. On the surface, there was the typical anger and frustration you would expect between two normal adults, but I saw something more under the surface. I saw fear. A raw, paralyzing fear that they both shared without ever expressing. They were afraid of things getting difficult. They were afraid of falling back into old habits. It made me afraid too. I was just a little girl who was reading all these emotions I barely understood and couldn't handle. And all this was happening without having to hear their thoughts, mind you. I often needed Sarah's help holding it together. She was always a lot stronger than me. She had the luxury of being able to internalize her emotions and deal with them. I never developed that talent. I wish I had, because all that fear eventually did catch up to us. My parents and I had to learn the hard way that being so deeply afraid was like a self-fulfilling prophecy. It puts you in the wrong mindset. It makes you careless, irrational, and frail. That's a bad combination when your luck finally runs out and you have to deal with real-life changes in the form of tragedy. One little mistake was all it took. Fate didn't have to do much to shake my family to the core. It only required a steady rain, a car with me and Sarah in the back seat, and two parents who were fighting more than they should have been. I remember being pretty overwhelmed. I was seeing a lot of conflict between my parents. They were arguing about an incident with my mom's sister who got into a fresh round of trouble. I don't remember exactly what they were debating. I just know it was heated, and they both looked as though they wanted to curl up in a fetal position. I tried to hold it together. Sarah held my hand, telling me it would pass once we got home. That never happened. In an instant, it felt like the earth itself had turned on us. It felt as though a giant hand reached up, grabbed the car, and shoved it into a perilous skid. I remember my mom and sister screaming. I remember seeing my dad's eyes widen with terror. At that point, I closed my eyes, hoping it was all just a bad dream. But the nightmare was just beginning. The car did at least 3 full flips. It landed upside down, causing the interior to crumble like a tin can. It all happened so fast, I didn't have time to scream. I probably couldn't have if I tried. I was feeling all these terrible emotions, not just from myself, but from my family as well. Professor Xavier later said that this trauma resulted in the first manifestation of my telepathy. I sincerely wish it hadn't, because the first thing I sensed was my dead sister. When I opened my eyes, the first thing I saw was Sarah looking at me with vacant eyes. She had been crushed so fast by it, she died instantly. Even if she hadn't, her injuries were pretty gruesome. I'll never get that image of blood, bone, and skin being warped beyond all recognition out of my mind. The sight of my dead sister was bad enough. When I called out for my parents, I found out they were in bad shape too. They were both alive, but out cold. My father's head was slammed against the side door, and his right arm was broken in 3 places. My mother was even worse. Her side of the car was a twisted jungle of metal and glass. It crushed her arm, her leg, 3 ribs, and a few bones in her back. I was the only one left conscious, and to this day I wish I wasn't. Because in that moment, I was completely overwhelmed. All these emotions came over me. I felt sorrow, fear, despair, grief. Pretty much every terrible feeling you would expect of a tragedy. Every aspect of that incident was etched into my soul. To this day, the horrors of that night are still with me. But they were just the beginning of a classic Gray family downward spiral. Everything soon became a blur. I don't even remember the paramedics arriving or the trip to the hospital. I just remember crying and sobbing to myself, trying to take control again. Usually, Sarah was the one who helped calm me down. Now she was gone, and I would have to cope with this on my own. The doctors later said she never stood a chance. Her neck had been crushed, and if that didn't kill her, then the blood loss sure did. As hard as it was for me to wrap my head around that at the tender age of 8, my mom and dad struggled in their own right, and not very well, I might add. My father was somewhat lucky, if you can call it that. He only suffered a concussion and a broken arm. He was going to make a full recovery. Then, when the doctors told him about Sarah, it became clear that he would never fully recover. I was in the room with him. I saw his reaction. He didn't break down crying or lash out. His face just became this beacon of sorrow. I honestly don't think he knew how to react. I think he tried to convince himself that this wasn't happening, as if that news hadn't been hard enough. He was hit with another shocker about my mom. Unlike Sarah, she survived. Unlike me and my father, she would never make a full recovery. In addition to the broken bones and bruising, the crash did serious damage to her lower back. It left her paralyzed from the chest down. She was never going to walk again. Not only that, there were a few blood clots during surgery. That meant she would be in chronic pain as well. I remember When I first saw her, I was practically froze. My father had to turn away. I think he would have thrown up if he could. When my mom eventually came to, she looked totally defeated. It was as if somebody reached inside and ripped her soul right out of her. Our lives were never going to be the same. My parents' worst fears had come to life. Their fragile world had been shattered. Now, they were going to have to be strong and adapt to these grim circumstances. All was not lost. We had the opportunities and the means to move forward without giving in to despair. I didn't want to give in to this sorrow. I didn't want this to be the end. Unfortunately, my parents didn't feel the same way. By the time we buried Sarah, it was official. My parents were not equipped to deal with this. As soon as my mom was discharged from the hospital, she had to adapt to life in a wheelchair. She didn't adapt very well, though. She constantly lashed out at me and my father, angry that she had to rely on others to do the most basic of activities. Her only solace were her pain pills. Boy, did she love those pain pills. Pretty soon she was downing them like they were candy. That seemed to be the only way she could cope. My dad's coping skills were just as bad. I watched as he put what had to be the most piss-poor effort into helping his family that anyone has ever done in the history of mankind. He seemed so lost, if not paralyzed at times. Whenever my mother complained or talked to him, he would get overwhelmed and shut down. I tried to reach out to him. He was my father after all, but he never responded. He coped solely through bottle after bottle of hard liquor. He had always been somewhat of a drinker, but now he was walking the road to full-fledged alcoholism. From the moment he got up to the moment he came home from work, he had a bottle of booze close by. He wouldn't talk about it. He wouldn't let anyone in. He would just avoid confronting hardship of any kind. He was content to just drink his problems away. This left me in quite a position. Sarah was gone and my parents had lost all hope. I was watching firsthand as my family fell apart. It's the kind of display that leaves a hell of a mark on a child. In a way, it was the only decent help my parents ever offered. They provided me with extra motivation to not end up like them. They may be okay with quitting, but I wasn't. That meant I had to pull myself together and stand on my own 2 feet. I couldn't be that emotional girl who got overwhelmed at the drop of a hat. I had to be strong in my own right, and I had to do it without my parents. The next few years were a real test of character. I had to wake up every morning and work hard so I could rise above my parents' shortcomings. That meant spending as little time at home as I could to get away from them. School became my only escape, which sounds pathetic in some ways and fitting in others. I used that environment as a proving ground, learning how to cope with all these feelings I had always struggled with. I didn't stop being passionate. I just learned to focus and channel it. I became stronger in the process. I didn't make many friends, but I did endear myself to others, and that was really powerful. My talent for empathy went a long way with people. It helped me connect with others in a way I wasn't getting at home. For a while, it looked as though I was well on my way. Things were getting worse with my parents, but they weren't taking me down with them. I was really encouraged for a while. Then, a new challenge emerged that I was completely unprepared for. It wasn't as horrific as a car crash, but it had an impact that was every bit as difficult. Sarah used to say my talent for empathy came from reading all the subtleties in someone's demeanor. It was a real talent that I was probably born with and something I should be careful with. It turned out she was right, at least partially. That empathy didn't just come from reading faces. It came from reading thoughts as well. I don't remember ever hearing a thought early on. Mutant powers don't usually manifest like that, but that empathy was a sign of things to come. After the crash, the floodgates in my mind began to crack. I started picking up on a few thoughts here and there. It was never much. I tried to write it off as just a product of being overwhelmed at times. I thought I can handle it. Then the floodgates broke, and my mind turned into a proverbial battleground. I started getting these weird seizures. Out of nowhere, I would be bombarded with this string of thoughts that felt like someone blowing an air horn right into my ears. It got so bad a few times I passed out. When I told the school nurse about the voices, she thought it was some lingering post-traumatic stress disorder from the car crash. My father would have looked into it further, but alcoholism seemed to be killing too many brain cells. It took 6 whole months of mental agony before I was sent to a hospital where they finally revealed the truth that I was a mutant. At the time, I didn't know what to make of it. This was when treatment for mutants was still developing, and nobody had any idea at the time that my telepathy was so strong. My parents were both clueless. They thought counseling was all they could muster, but no counselor is equipped to deal with a confused telepath. To their credit, they tried to help me cope. For a while, I was semi-functional. I forced myself to be even stronger, doing everything I could to keep my mind in one piece. That wasn't easy when I didn't understand what the hell these powers entailed. Eventually, that lack of understanding caught up to me. By the time I was 12, the mental strain was so great it triggered another latent talent. It started when I was in school. I would go through my little episodes and small objects around me would start to shake. Pretty soon that shaking turned into an all-out assault. I remember some of the teachers thinking I was possessed by a demon or something, if only that were the case, because I would argue telekinesis is way more destructive. It got so bad one time I levitated every desk in my classroom and knocked several bookcases. This turned me from a tragic victim to an all-out freak, and all those friends I had were now afraid and completely turned their backs on me. Even worse, the principal was steamed about the damage I caused and had me expelled. That was the worst thing that could have happened. Being expelled meant I had to spend my days at home again. My mother was getting worse day by day. She was taking so many painkillers at this point that she was basically in the same dazed state every hour of every day. My dad's drinking didn't get better either. He had graduated to the harder liquors now and was drunk more often than when he was sober. On top of that, his teaching career was going downhill. He was on the verge of getting fired, and me being there with my problems was just too much for him. I needed my father to stop squandering every chance he had at making things better. I needed him to step up and be strong for me because I couldn't handle these powers on my own. He had every opportunity to make the right decision. He failed at any turn. After just one telekinetic outburst at home, he called the hospital and had me committed to a mental ward.